Welcome to another OmniFocus Fitness video. Today we will be discussing the post-exercise cool down. Might seem like a kind of a small subject, but actually it's pretty interesting. It's got a few variables that most people don't talk about. So we're going to talk about them in this video. We're going to talk about what a post-exercise cool down is. Seems pretty obvious. Also going to be discussing how it benefits your health and how it can benefit in other areas, as well as how long that post-exercise cool down should be. So if that sounds like something that you'd be interested in, then just stay tuned. Let's go! So first things first, what is a cool down? Well, a cool down, as I've already mentioned in the introduction, is a period immediately after exercise, so post-exercise, in which you slowly taper off the intensity. So let's say you were to do an exercise bout, so you warm up, right? You warm up first, or you should be warming up first, and then you start actually doing your working sets, or you're going to start working within that range that's called a working range or optimal range for your training, so your exercise. So let's say you're running at, let's say, 55% of your VO2 max, and you finish your workout, and then at the end, right when you decide I've had enough, this is good enough for my workout for the day, then you would slowly decrease the intensity until you're maybe just walking. So that cool down is kind of that tapering effect down to a near resting level of intensity. That's it. That's all a cool down is. You probably already knew what it was, but it's better to go ahead and define it rather than just assume. So let's move on. Okay, so why is it important? Why am I making an entire video about a cool down to exercise? Doesn't seem like it's that interesting, but actually it does have some interesting implications. We're going to be talking about 3 of them, and specifically one of them is very interesting. So let's go ahead and attack that one first. So the first thing that a cool down does is it is a preventative measure for myocardial infarction, so a heart attack. And with that comes a story. Story time, yay! All right, so I was in one of my exercise classes in one of my, my exercise prescription class, and my professor told us the story about a man called Jim Fixx. And Jim Fixx was a man who, prior to his fame, was sedentary, so didn't exercise much, and also smoked quite a bit. Basically just had some rough habits. Then he had a change of heart and started running a lot, and actually came out with a few books. And he was really popular in the 1970s and early 1980s. Well, what's unique about that is that he actually died. He died from a heart attack. And he died from the heart attack during exercise. So it's interesting because one of the speculations as to why he died during exercise specifically was because of the physiological process that I'm going to explain to you in a second that led to his death while running. So running actually compounded a underlying effect, so an underlying problem that he was already dealing with. That does not mean that running causes heart attacks. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that Jim Fixx actually had partially blocked arteries, partially blocked veins that are leading to and from the heart. And it's possible, there are really 3 instances in which you can get a heart attack. One of them, your arteries or your veins one or several of them are blocked, so that not enough blood or not no blood at all can reach the heart or get away from the heart. And in that case, then your heart muscles end up dying because they're not getting oxygen, which they need, just like any other muscle in the body. Another instance is a partial blockage. So you have a partial blockage of one of the arteries or veins, or several of them, but your body is able to maintain normal function at a resting state. So let's say you're just sitting around, you're walking, doing mild walking, things like that are extremely low activity. Your body can sustain that, so you don't really sense that you're having any sort of heart issues. That's the second instance. Now the third instance is the one that's specific to Mr. Fix. And what happened to him was he had a partial blockage of the heart, and then exercise then of course needs a extreme amount of input from the heart. So it goes without saying, if we were to break down exercise in terms of cardiac output. So cardiac output is broken up between heart rate and stroke volume. So think of heart rate as the speed by which the heart is pumping, and stroke volume, the strength by which it pumps each stroke. So each stroke, the amount of blood that gets ejected from the heart. So those obviously elevate to a point during exercise, and this is of course dependent on the intensity of exercise, but let's assume a person could just do moderate exercise or even vigorous exercise, and their heart rate is of course going to climb, and their stroke volume will climb as well. Well, there's a limit to that, of course. And imagine if your heart is completely block free, so it's perfectly healthy, then it's going to function well. It's going to function without any sort of issues, and it's just going to keep squeezing the necessary amount of blood in and out of itself so that it can feed the rest of the body. So that's not much of an issue. Let's say you're doing vigorous exercise, you're near maximal exercise, and you're exercising and whatnot. Your blood supply is completely fine. Your body's going to be able to push that blood no matter what. Now, in Mr. Fix's case, he had partial blockage in around his heart. So if you take that same concept of the heart is trying to supply blood to the rest of the body, and it's working really hard, so it's near maximal heart rate, and stroke volume is already plateaued out because stroke volume plateaus out at a certain point. So cardiac output as a whole, again, heart rate and stroke volume together make cardiac output. Cardiac output as a whole is already being maximized to the most it possibly can. Now the thing is that wasn't that big of an issue for Mr. Jim Fix. The issue was when he came to an intersection. So at this intersection, he stopped. He stopped exercising, which makes sense, right? I mean, you're not just going to run out an intersection with cars coming and whatnot. So that's obviously a natural thing to do. But as he stopped, this is the most important part. The heart was already pushing as hard as it possibly could because he'd been exercising for a while. So he got to that point, and then he stopped moving. And when you stop moving, something else becomes a factor. So the arteries, we're going to split this into the arteries and the veins. Okay, so the arteries are lined with enough muscle to kind of propel blood throughout the body. The veins, on the other hand, are smaller and tend not to have as much lining muscle around to push blood from the body back to the heart. However, what our body is so magnificently designed for is that when you're moving, your muscles are constantly contracting. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. And that in itself is extremely useful, but not only do the muscles contract just for the sake of skeletal movement, but they also help move venous return. So when, let's say, in your legs, and this is specific to the legs in this particular circumstance, but when your calf muscles are contracting, they're pushing against those veins and propelling blood back up to the heart, which helps because the heart then doesn't have to use just its muscle to constantly push the entire cardiovascular system to keep it moving at an optimal rate. So you're using your muscles to, aside from your heart, to help move blood back up, especially if you think about it from gravity's point of view. Gravity's pushing down, or at least that's how I understand gravity. Gravity's pushing down on you, and if your blood goes down into your feet, that's a problem. That's called pooling, blood pooling. So blood goes back down into your feet, and if you're exercising, that's not that much of an issue, because then on the venous return, when your veins are then pushing the blood back up, your muscles, your leg muscles, are contracting because you're moving. And because of that, it's helping your heart by moving that blood back up to your heart. Now, if you stop moving, however, you're not getting that contraction of the muscles. And in that case, your heart has to make up for the fact that you're getting venous pooling or blood pooling in your feet and in your legs. And in Mr. Fix's case, his heart was already pushing at maximal amount. It was pushing so hard, trying to make sure that he could perform his exercise, which it could do with the help of the contraction of the skeletal muscles. That wasn't that big of an issue. But the moment he stopped at the intersection and didn't keep moving, you have to just keep moving in some way, that led to him having a heart attack, because his heart was then taxed so much that it gave out. So, why did I tell you that? How does that apply to the cool down? Well, the cool down post-exercise, imagine you're doing exercise. You finish your exercise. If you were to stop immediately and just stand still, the same thing would happen. Blood pooling would end up in your legs. Now, it's not that extreme that if you've got a healthy heart, I'll discuss this in a little bit. If you've got a healthy heart, you're probably fine. Okay, there's almost no danger of that being an issue. However, if you do have any sort of cardiovascular disease, that can be an issue, and that could be lethal. Again, not a massive issue. It's not like this happens to everyone. It's just an interesting concept, and it's something that people think happened to Mr. Fix. So that compounded effect with the fact that his heart was already labored from having plaque in his arteries and veins. So why do a cool down in that situation? Again, just to make sure that your body is running on all cylinders and you're not putting undue stress, which typically it would be able to handle, but in an atypical situation it might, the keyword might, not be able to handle, by allowing your muscles to help your heart in that situation. So just keep walking, keep moving, taper off, and allow your physiology to catch up with the energy demands that you've just put on it, which it might take a few minutes. Okay, so that's the interesting one. I thought it's the most interesting one. So that's the one I wanted to focus on. But there are two more. So let's go ahead and look at those two. Okay, a less problematic issue would be something like stretching. So again, you can kind of think of it kind of from a rational standpoint. If you've just done some really intense exercise, let's say you've been doing some high intensity interval training, or you've been doing really high percentage, like above 60% vigorous aerobic exercise of some sort, then your heart's going to be going, right? And if you just stop immediately and then do stretches, for example, if you were to start stretching afterwards, I mean, your body's still trying to recuperate. It's going through that post-exercise oxygen consumption, so you're kind of heaving in and out, trying to catch up. Your body's trying to catch up again with that, because you're not allowing the physiology of your body to kind of regroup and get you back to a resting state. So in stretching, it seems kind of self-explanatory that if you're going to be having those violent motions that having a cool down period in which you're not allowing your muscles to cool off to a point where they're cold and stretching could be kind of uncomfortable, but you're also not allowing your body to be so worn out from exercising not like 30 seconds ago or 15 seconds ago and going immediately into stretching, which could lead to possibly injuring yourself or just being in an uncomfortable situation just in general. It's not that serious, but it's just a situation in which a cool down could help, because in a cool down would allow for your physiology to kind of relax a little bit, to go back to its resting state, but still have those muscle bellies to be warm and still have blood flowing through those areas, as well as your tendons, which would allow for the best elasticity of your muscles. So that's the second reason. Not quite as extensive as the first, but still interesting. And the final reason that I'm going to discuss here is something that I've already slightly mentioned in the first reason, which was to prevent blood pooling in the lower extremities. This, of course, isn't as much of an issue if you've got a nice, healthy heart, which most of us do, but even with a healthy heart, blood pooling can be an issue. And in that situation, you could experience things like dizziness, syncope, which is passing out, or even in that situation, your body's going to kind of pull in blood to your internal organs, which could create like shakiness in your fingers. It could have some sort of a cold sensation in your fingers or tingliness, things like that, which I'm sure people have actually experienced in exercise in general, especially in cold weather. You'll notice that kind of tingly feeling in your fingers because that blood is being drawn back towards your torso. So it's not a huge issue. Of course, syncope can have some pretty drastic issues, specifically if you're elderly and you end up falling because you pass out. That could have some serious implications, but in general, it's not that serious. Just again, when we're talking about a cool down, all we're talking about is just reducing intensity to like near resting levels, just walking, just simply walking is enough to push that, to help that venous return with the skeletal muscles. And that's that. That's all I've got to cover for why a cool down is important. So, how long should you be cooling down? Let's find out. Well, how long should you be cooling down? It's really dependent on the intensity of your exercise. If you're going to be doing something like high intensity interval training or some vigorous activity, then of course you're going to want a little bit longer cool down. And when I'm talking about a longer cool down, I'm talking like 5 minutes. I'm not talking like 30 minutes of cooling down. Just 5 minutes, just as you slowly taper down, maybe on the minute, every 2 minutes, you drop your intensity considerably and allow your body to kind of come in for its landing to a resting state. If you're doing light activity or even lower end of the moderate activity scale, so like 40-50% of your VO2 in aerobic settings, then your cool down can probably just be like a minute or two. Doesn't have to be too extreme. Again, in the end, what you want to be doing is walking near the end of your cool down stage. That's that. That's all you have to know. Yeah, that's it. I don't have anything else to say. I don't know why I'm waiting. Let's move on. And in summary, here we are again. For those of you that just want to recap, or for those of you who do not want to watch my long videos, the summary section is here for you. And in the summary section, basically what we're saying in the entire video is that a cool down is just the post-exercise period in which you taper off of intensity. The benefits that it offers is if you've got a high CVD risk, so cardiovascular disease risk, it could be life-changing. It could actually put you in a healthier position because it doesn't put as much strain on your heart. If you'd like to know a story, then watch the entire video or read the article. What else it does is it improves stretching, so your muscles will be still warm, but you won't be panting so much from high intensity exercise or vigorous exercise. And also it helps against blood pooling, which even for people that have a healthy heart, people can get a little dizzy if they just stand still immediately after exercise or if they don't move much. So continuously walking after exercising, allowing your heart rate to drop, allowing your cardiac output in general to lower back to near resting levels, allows your physiology to adapt and go back to a more resting state. And that makes sure that you don't get dizzy immediately after exercise as the blood moves to your legs. And that's that. That is the entire video. If you would like to know more, of course, please, as always, check out the article, which is linked below and will pop up on the screen once the screen blacks out. If you found the information useful, please, it is a huge motivator when I see people subscribe. But no matter what, I will still keep putting out content. I love this stuff. Hopefully you do too. I will see you in the next video. Peace.